The morning the city forgot how to listen began with a small, almost invisible struggle. In a glass and steel café, where steam rose like breath and people queued with phones glowing in their palms, a young woman stood at the counter, her shoulders tight, her eyes searching faces that never quite met hers. She moved her hands carefully, precisely, as if shaping meaning out of air, but the noise swallowed her. Cups clinked, machines hissed, impatience thickened, and the line behind her grew restless. In that moment, surrounded by 100 voices and not a single ear, her silence became a storm. She did not know it yet, but the next few minutes would change the direction of her life and the life of a single father who believed the world had already passed him by. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a second right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. The café sat at the corner of a busy avenue where success moved fast and compassion often lagged behind. The young woman had chosen this place because it was supposed to be simple, a quiet ritual before a long day of meetings she would attend with interpreters and assistants, and people paid to understand her. But this morning, she had come alone, determined to do something ordinary without help. Her hearing had been gone since childhood, taken by an illness that doctor named with clinical distance, as if naming it could make it smaller. She had learned to live with the silence, to read lips, to sign, to adapt, but there were days when the world felt like a locked door she had to push open again and again. She tried to point at the menu, tried to shape words she knew would not land right, tried to smile through the embarrassment blooming in her chest. The barista leaned forward, brows furrowed, guessing, correcting, growing flustered. A man behind her sighed loudly. A woman checked her watch. Someone muttered something that landed like a slap, even if the words themselves never reached her ears. She felt heat crawl up her neck. For all her wealth, all her privilege, all the protection money could buy, this moment stripped her down to something painful, human. A person asking for a cup of coffee and being told by the world again that asking was too much. A few steps back, balancing a backpack that had seen better years and holding the hand of a small boy with sleep still clinging to his lashes, stood a man who knew this kind of humiliation intimately. His name was Daniel, though most days it felt like just another label on a life that had been simplified to survival. He was a single father, widowed young, carrying grief like a second spine. His mornings began before dawn with lunches packed and shoes tied and reassurances whispered to a child who asked where mommy was in the quiet way kids ask when they already know the answer. He worked nights cleaning offices and mornings delivering parcels, stitching together a living that left little room for pride. But there was one thing his life had given him that the world could not take away: fluency in sign language, learned not in a classroom, but at a kitchen table with a sister who had been deaf and brilliant and gone too soon. Daniel watched the scene at the counter with a familiar ache. He recognized the way the young woman smile wavered, the way her hands paused mid-gesture, the way she looked down as if shrinking might make the problem disappear. He recognized it because he had seen it in his sister. Eyes 1,000 times. Without thinking about lines or time or the boy tugging gently at his sleeve, he stepped forward. He moved into the space beside the counter, careful, respectful, and he lifted his hands. What happened next did not involve sound, but it resonated, louder than anything else in the room. Daniel signed with calm clarity, his movements confident and kind, asking what she wanted, offering help without pity. The young woman's face changed instantly, tension melting into disbelief and then relief. Her hands answered his, quick and expressive, gratitude flickering across her features like light through water. The barista watched, stunned, as meaning finally flowed. The order was placed, the transaction completed, and something fragile but powerful settled into the air. For the first time that morning, the young woman breathed fully. She had been seen, not as a problem, not as an inconvenience, not as a curiosity, but as a person whose language mattered. She thanked Daniel in the only way she knew how, with a smile that reached her eyes, and a small bow of her head that carried more weight than words ever could. Daniel shrugged it off with the practiced humility of someone used to doing the right thing quietly. He took his coffee and turned to leave, tugging his son along, already filing the moment away at a simple kindness in a day full of tasks. But kindness has a way of refusing to stay small. The young woman watched him go, noting the way he held his son's hand, the way he bent slightly to listen with his eyes when the boy signed something clumsy and earnest back at him. She felt a tug of curiosity that surprised her. Her life was surrounded by people who spoke for her, planned for her, protected her. This man had done any of that. He had simply met her where she was. What Daniel did not know was that the woman he had helped was the daughter of one of the most powerful billionaires in the city. A man whose name lit up stock tickers and charity galas alike. She had grown up in penthouses and private schools, but her deafness had carved a lonely path through all of it. Her father loved her fiercely, but love could not translate the world for her. She had learned early that money could open doors, but it could not make people patient or kind or willing to learn her language. That morning, watching a stranger bridge that gap without hesitation stirred something she had not felt in a long time, hope without strings. The days that followed were heavy for Daniel. Rent was due, his delivery hours were cut, and his son's school sent another notice about a field trip he could not afford. He told himself that this was just how life was now, a series of small disappointments, punctuated by moments of fierce love for the boy who was his anchor. He did not expect the phone call that came one afternoon while he was mopping a lobby, his hands raw and his back aching. The call led to an interview. The interview led to a meeting, and the meeting led him back to the same woman from the café, now seated in a quiet room with an interpreter present but unnecessary. She signed to him directly, explaining that she ran a foundation focused on accessibility and inclusion, that she had been searching for someone Ho understood not just the language of sign, but the lived experience behind it. She had seen the way he communicated with his son, the ease and respect, and she wanted him to help her build something real. Daniel felt the old fear rise. The instinct to say no before hope could make a fool of him. He had been burned before by promises that glittered and vanished, but he also felt his sister's memory like a hand on his shoulder, urging him not to turn away from a chance to matter. He agreed to try, telling himself it would be temporary, just another pack in the quilt of survival. What unfolded was not temporary at all. Daniel became a bridge between worlds that had long stood apart. He worked with teams to train staff, to redesign spaces, to make inclusion more than a slogan. He brought his son to meetings where the boy sat quietly coloring, absorbing a future that suddenly felt wider. The billionaire's daughter watched Daniel navigate rooms with humility and strength, watched him listen before speaking, watched him advocate without ego. In him, she saw a version of power she had rarely encountered, one that did not need volume to be effective. Their bond deepened not through grand gestures but through shared purpose. They spent long hours shaping programs that gave deaf children access to education, that taught sign language to service workers, that made the simple act of ordering coffee less of a battleground. Each success felt like a small victory against a world that had taught them both, in different ways, to expect less, but growth invites resistance. There were board members who questioned Daniel's place, who saw his worn jacket and tired eyes and assumed incompetence. There were whispers about favoritism, about charity driven by sentiment rather than strategy. Daniel felt the weight of imposter syndrome press in, the old voice telling him he did not belong. On nights when doubt threatened to drown him, he watched his son sleep and remembered why he kept going. He remembered the café, the moment when silence had been transformed into connection. The billionaire's daughter faced her own battles. She was tired of being underestimated, tired of being protected into paralysis. Working with Daniel gave her courage to assert herself, to lead not as a symbol but as a strategist. She challenged her father, redefined her role, and insisted that accessibility was not an expense but an investment. Their conversations were not always easy, but they were honest, and honesty has a way of reshaping even the most rigid empires. The turning point came at a public event meant to showcase the foundation's work. The room was full of donors and cameras, a polished stage set for applause. As presentations rolled on, a technical failure knocked out the audio system. Panic rippled through the organizers. For many, the event was over. For Daniel and the billionaire's daughter, it was an opportunity. They stepped forward together and addressed the room in sign, inviting everyone to watch, to learn, to experience communication beyond sound. Interpreters moved swiftly, translating back and forth, but the heart of the moment belonged to the hands shaping meaning in the air. The silence was electric. People leaned in. Some fumbled, trying to copy simple signs. Laughter softened into respect. By the end, the applause felt different, less about performance and more about recognition. The message was clear without ever being spoken. Inclusion is not charity, it is humanity. That night, Daniel walked home with his son under a sky scrubbed clean by rain. The boy sighed excitedly about the people who had clapped, about the way the room had felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel smiled, a quiet pride blooming in his chest. He thought of his sister, of the mornings she had struggled to be understood, of how far they had come without ever planning to. He realized then that his life was no longer just about surviving. It was about shaping a world his son could be proud of. Near the end of the year, the foundation announced a new initiative, one that would fund sign language education nationwide. Daniel was named its director, not as a token, but as a testament to lived experience. The billionaire's daughter stood beside him, her leadership undeniable, her voice strong in its own way. Together, they had turned a moment of quiet kindness into a movement. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment now to like the video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe for more stories that remind us who we can be when we choose empathy. As the story drew to a close, there was one more thing the billionaire's daughter insisted on adding. She asked that people watching be invited not just to feel inspired, but to act. She asked for a simple commitment. A comment left below the video sharing. One small way viewers could make their own communities more inclusive, because stories matter, but actions change lives. In the end, the cafe remained just a cafe, the city just a city. But for two people who had once stood on opposite sides of silence, it became the place where everything shifted, a place where a single father's hands reminded a powerful woman that she was not alone, a place where kindness proved it did not need permission or a spotlight to matter. And for everyone watching, it became a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with something as ordinary as helping someone order a cup of coffee